Welcome back. So here I'm setting up to test the flex in the system under a load on the stick, but before I do that, let me show you how I've set this up. So back in behind the bulkhead there, I've got this extra cable that I've anchored to part of the top of the gear system, and I've put it around one side of the turnbuckle here so I can anchor it the back side of the whole loop there, so in one direction, so I can pull on it and it won't move at that point. And so now I've got my strap there around the mid part of the side stick and hooked up to my little load cell thing here, and basically just pulling on the stick at this point. And so I'm able to pull full deflection and with a weight of about 65 pounds, and ideally in a perfect world it wouldn't move at all. Be able to pull 65 pounds and just have no deflection whatsoever, but that's obviously not happening. So what's going on is partly there's, I think, still some stretch happening in the cable, just because of the gearing that I have, how much travel it is, and the length of the cable is about 25 feet on one side of the loop. And the other part is happening in the sheathing. So here's the setup in the front here, and this is actually a different time I was doing it, but you can see what's going on here. So I'm pulling on the stick there, and that's rotating the wheel, and you can see the cable on the left hand side coming out of the sheathing there, and those brackets I put there, they're not moving at all, but the sheathing is moving a little bit, and I think part of the stretch or part of the flex is coming from the cable and parts coming from the sheathing. And looking out in the wing here, this is the bell crank that it's connected to, and that's moving about half the distance in terms of the cable throw as what it was moving back at the other end. So that shows me that half of the flex is before this and half of the flex is after this, and then from there it continues out to where I've got it anchored. And looking at the sheathing there going coming out of the keel and going up there behind that bulkhead, you can see there's a little bit of movement in that when I do it. I'm not sure that it's compressing or anything like that, but it's definitely moving, and any sort of movement indicates that there's flex there, obviously, and that's probably creating this slack that's in there, and you can see that pulls towards the camera there when I do that. So anyway, it's basically not working. And so just in order to get some more detailed numbers and stuff, here I'm measuring the distance. So the wheel there is going through about 30 millimeters of travel, so over an inch, and that's my full travel. This is the sleeve there just below the wheel, just to show you how that moves as well under load. And I've tried anchoring this in different ways, and shortening it obviously, and tried all sorts of different things, and I really don't think it's any better than what it was with the flex that I had in the pulleys. This is out in the wing, and you can see there I've got about half the travel there, about 15 millimeters of travel in the cable there. So and there's the bell crank out there, same type of deal. And ideally that wouldn't be moving at all if there was no flex in the system. So yeah, I think I'm going to have to rethink what's going on here. I'm going to actually measure. You can see I even put the pulley there just to sort of support that cable sleeve, but I think that made it worse because it stretched it out, which allowed it to compress again under tension. So that didn't really help. And again, this is just looking back down the keel. So I think I'm going to have to come up with some other interesting ideas about this. So this is looking again the front here. I could potentially just go back to the pulley system, and now that I've got those pulleys out of the way, I could potentially drill some holes there in the keel and potentially brace this up, but I've got 1/4 inch holes that go through the pulleys, and so I'd still end up with a 1/4 inch rod going all the way across, and across 13 inches it's probably going to flex as well, so that may not help as well to do that. And as I said, the cable it's about 52 feet altogether around the total loop, and if it stretches a certain percentage, even a small percentage could end up being 10 millimeters, and 10 millimeters of flex in there is just too much for the total travel that I have of only 30 millimeters. So it's like 30% flex in there when it's under load. So I'm thinking about possibly Teleflex cables, but I may have a problem anchoring them at this point up the front here and connecting them to the wheel, because they have to go around that radius, which is about a 6-inch radius. The Teleflex cable may not like a radius as tight as that. The other option is to potentially use, and this is actually looking back now quickly underneath the keel, you can see all the stuff that ended up being in here, because of the prototype, with all the hoses and lines and everything like that. So getting in there and trying to brace up those pulleys in there is just almost impossible. Even if I cut a big hole in the floor or cut a hole in the keel or whatever, those bolts that come out of the side of the pulleys there, they pretty much are going to hit into the inside of the keel there even before you get them out of the bracket. So I think I'm just out of options with bracing that up there. Anyway, so my thoughts are potentially using an electric actuator out on the aileron and doing like a fly-by-wire system, but at the same time keeping the original pulley system as a kind of like a backup. At least for the prototype, and then ultimately for production the idea would be just to go back to a push rod system and just make it fit with the bracketry and stuff that we have holding the main gear in place. So anyway, I'm open to suggestions, and I'm just talking to some other people who I consult with on this project, including Mark and Justin and whatever and everybody else, just to see what the options are. But I want to get this thing flying as a prototype. And I think probably electrical actuator, because that's what we had on the model, is not a bad solution really, and it may not be that difficult to retrofit it. You just have a linear pot there hooked up to the front wheel there in the keel, and then electric actuators out on the ailerons to actuate them, and then keep the cable system as a backup in case the electrical failed, and if I use a stepper motor it will fail safe and it won't lock the ailerons. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now, but again, I've only had a couple of hours to think about this, and I've only talked to one other person right now, so still throwing ideas around, but I got to think of something that's going to work, and it just has to be for the prototype to get this flying. If it was to cut a hole in the bottom there, I could get to all those pulleys again, but would I be able to brace it up? I don't think so. I'm not sure. Anyway, a bit of a dilemma, and probably one of the most difficult problems I have to solve now. So that's my update, and we'll see what I come up with on Tuesday. Thanks again for watching.